good morning. Excited to be here. Austin and APIs, two of my favorite things. How many here are local? How many locals do we have? Yeah, wow, fantastic. So this morning I want to talk a little bit about some of the trends that we're seeing around the space of APIs, API platforms, as well as the influence of microservices and serverless on those API platforms. Talk about how we're shifting our perspective to a broader view of the overall enterprise architecture as part of our API initiatives, and then try to take a peek a little bit into the future and see what some of that may hold for us coming up. So a brief introduction about myself. I'm an executive API consultant, which means I work with a lot of organizations to help with their API programs. Help them come in and establish their API program, grow it, mature it, help them with API design and architectural concerns and documentation and other aspects. I live currently in Colorado Springs, although spent almost 25 years in Austin, so I'm back home. It's great to be back. The first thing I want to do is build on Bill's talk, and thank you, Bill, for that, about the API landscape. Bill gave us a great overview of some of the trends that are occurring, so I think it makes sense for us to kind of come back and remember and remind ourselves, because we get so caught up in APIs sometimes and about moving data around, about the technical aspects of it, that our APIs really are about solving customer problems, workforce problems, partner problems, integrating solutions, and just having general utility-based APIs. And that means that they're going to take on different styles. We're going to have the traditional REST-based request response where we're using HTTP. We may also see things like request acknowledge, where we have long-running workflows and processes, so we need to kick off that process and then over time continue to execute steps within that. We also have batch-based APIs that are starting to replace the file-based batch integrations that we've had for many, many years. And there are still organizations I know that have to deal with those file-based interactions. We're starting to see APIs begin to start to replace those. As Bill mentioned, publish subscribe is becoming more common now. So we have events and streaming over HTTP. So we may have it inside our architecture, inside our organization, but we may also be leveraging that over HTTP for our integrations. And we're seeing different kinds of API styles. So we have things like REST, which has become kind of a foundation for a lot of organizations. We're seeing growth in gRPC for service-to-service communication inside the organization. And we're seeing GraphQL used for a variety of use cases as well that Bill outlined previously. So those are pretty common for the request response and request acknowledge and some of the other styles. Then we're starting to see GraphQL, gRPC, things like server sent events, WebSockets, and webhooks to really extend the platform that you're building. So rather than just forcing people to poll your API and to constantly check to see if new data has changed, or having to open up the platform and insert new behaviors, instead we start emitting events through these different protocols to allow us to extend our platforms beyond what they were originally designed to do. We use this kind of architectural approach, like things like event-driven architecture, to allow ourselves to extend our applications internally and to communicate between systems. Now we're starting to see organizations really embrace the idea of sharing events outside the platform and allowing people to react and build on top of things. Really, really powerful. Now, what's an API conference without a Roy Fielding quote, right? We've got to at least pull Roy in here once. But I really like this quote because it really sets the stage for a lot of the current thinking that we're seeing. REST was really designed around the idea of HTTP in the case of the web. It's for coarse-grained communication, not fine-grained communication. So it means we have to consider what else we should be incorporating into our API platforms. And that's what a lot of what I see as I work with different organizations, is that they're not only embracing REST, but they're also looking at other things, which means we're moving from a versus where we see all the articles about REST versus GraphQL, GraphQL versus gRPC, and so on, just like we saw the previous generation of SOAP versus REST. And now we're starting to see the and. We're starting to see the combination of things make a more robust platform to solve a variety of different use cases that we sometimes were force-fitting into REST APIs previously. And I talked about this at last Nordic Summit, and I think there's a video out there on that, so if you want to hear a little bit more and dig in a little bit more about that, you can. But just bear in mind that our API platforms don't have to be homogeneous with just a single REST-based API. We need to start looking and understanding when we would use these different styles, when we wouldn't, document and help communicate and socialize those practices in addition to the standards that we have internally. So as I said, I work with a lot of different organizations, and I want to take you through a fictional journey, but one that might represent something that you're in the middle of right now. Let's talk about and think about an e-commerce solution, a company that deals with e-commerce. And one of the first things that they have to do is they have to build an API to support their web and mobile applications. So they craft their database, their APIs. Maybe it's one single API with a number of different resources. Maybe it's a few separated APIs that they've composed. And then they use that with their web and mobile app. And they're able to gain traction in the marketplace. They're starting to experience growth within the organization, and they start hiring more developers. And pretty soon, the velocity of their development starts to slow down. So they start to look to different techniques on what to do. And one of the things that we see is microservices. We see microservices as a way to reduce coordination by decomposing our problems into smaller, independent, and deployable components within our overall architecture. This is where, in part of my training that I conduct, I use a thing called the Microservice Design Canvas. This was inspired by Matt McClarty from API Academy, which was in turn inspired by a number of other canvases that are out, from the business model canvas to the lean canvas and others, where we try to lay out the bare essentials of what a microservice is meant to do. And that includes the summary of what it's meant to do, the capabilities. But what I'm really interested in, and I really focus in on during the training I conduct, is over here on the right, the interface side, where we have queries, commands, events published, and then on the dependency side, the events subscribed to. So when we start thinking about and reasoning about our APIs from that perspective, whether you're using CQRS or not, being able to think about what things are commands that I'm exposing via my APIs, what are the queries that I'm offering, and then what are the events that I'm publishing that other people could extend from, it starts to shift my thinking about the APIs that I'm building. I can break out of that idea of the CRUD pattern, the create, read, update, delete, is the only thing in my toolbox, and I can start to think about what should this API really do so that I can deliver a great developer experience and people can build on my API platform quickly and easily. I'm also seeing this shift towards serverless, and serverless is a really interesting world. We have the function as a service that really kind of gained popularity of late, where we can break things down not even just to services but to functions, or to effectively late deploying and executing of our code so that we only use the resources that we need when we need them, allowing us to efficiently manage both our internal data center on-prem resources as well as our cloud resources and control our costs. We're also seeing things like on the right, GitHub Actions, that are hosting behaviors for us. So we don't even have to worry about hosting the behavior that we want to execute after we do a git push. Instead, we can define that as a series of GitHub Actions and let GitHub run that pipeline for us on its own infrastructure. So what this means is our API platform just isn't within our own organization. It's expanding outside of it, and we have to take those things into consideration, determine what the impact of that is, and we do have to also monitor that surface area through a number of different description languages that I'll talk about. So our enterprise API platforms are starting to grow. We went from an API with some front-end web and mobile applications and databases in the back end to now having to decompose things into capabilities, technical and business capabilities that represent what our business does. And then the operations that we use to implement them, the commands, the queries, the events that we make available for people to build upon. So we continue to grow, we're starting to scale our organization, everything's great, we're super smart and everybody loves us and we get lots of bonuses and raises. And then the business comes to us and says, we need to upsell, cross-sell. We need to be able to upsell our products, cross-sell our products, do a better job of increasing the average sale of each transaction on our website. So now we need to dig into the data and we need to understand the data and combine that so that when we surface those insights through our APIs, we can have a direct correlation to increase in sales. So we sit down and we start looking at our database and we start reasoning about it and we think mentally the model is something like this, where everything is cohesive and grouped together and well thought out and normalized, and it's going to just be cake. Then we realize that this is what it really looks like. And so we have to spend some time understanding how to manage our data. Now, some organizations that are larger probably already have dedicated data management, data governance teams, but not everybody does. So we have to understand what our data looks like. We have to start refactoring our databases as well as our code. We have to think about where our data should live and how we're going to use it. And that has a direct impact on the success or failure of our APIs, the capabilities, the operations that we're building from, and then building up into these different APIs. So now we're starting to see these data pipelines emerge. And traditionally, we would use ETL, extract, transform, and load, to migrate data between different systems, to build data warehouses, three-dimensional databases, and so on, to be able to reason about our data and get the insights that we want. Except that doesn't quite work anymore with the amount of data that we have today. So what we instead have to start thinking about is how we deal with that amount of data. So we're starting to see data streaming come in with things like Kafka and Pulsar and Kinesis and others. We use that for high-velocity, high-volume data, drive that into a data lake where it goes and lives and is never seen again, or we run data analysis on it. So we use things like Apache Spark and other kinds of tools. We run big queries against the data. So we're shifting our world from that ETL process to what's really an extract and load, which is the streaming side into our data lake, and then a query and transform so that we can analyze it on the back end through all these different solutions that we have. We can then load that data back into the data lake, into transactional systems, into data warehouses, wherever it makes sense, so that we can power our APIs. So our enterprise platform is now becoming a lot more complex because we not only just have our APIs, but we have our capabilities, we have our operations, we have data management. All of these things are impacting our APIs. This is where we're going to. These are the types of problems that I'm seeing a lot of organizations starting to move toward. Those beginning APIs that were really easy to build start to get really complex because the real world hits you in the face and says, I got to deal with data, I've got to deal with operations, I have to deal with scaling my development teams, I've got to deal with offshore teams, I've got to deal with everything that all combines together. How do I reason and organize about this? So that's where I want to talk about this evolving API platform and where we're headed and how we can start to tackle this. So when I talked about capabilities, one of the things I do in training is talk about jobs to be done, modeling jobs to be done. We spend a lot of time talking about user stories, but sometimes that doesn't give us the context of what the end user is trying to do. So I like to step back and think about what is that job to be done, what are those capabilities or those outcomes that are desired by people, and then how do we turn that into APIs that empower our developers to build solutions to meet those needs. And that's a much different perspective than what database tables or what data do I need to expose, and let me just quickly build an API to solve that. That's what API design first that Bill was talking about earlier is really about. It's about taking that, having some empathy about your end users, and then designing APIs to solve the problems that they're having. And maybe even to anticipate the problems that they're going to have in the future that may not even realize that they have today. So when we think about capabilities, we think about what's on the left-hand side of this slide, the things that, the outcomes, the desires, the things that we want done. The right side are all the technical details that a lot of us in this room really enjoy digging into. How am I going to design this API and make it work for developers? So this is the two layers here that we have, capabilities and operations. And the best way to document capabilities that I've found so far is ALPS. Application Level Profile Semantics. It's a recommended approach for capturing the capabilities that your application or your API supports. Without dealing with specific protocols, it's protocol agnostic, it allows us to capture the capabilities and the core data fields that are involved in the use of that capability. It becomes, in effect, an interface definition for our APIs. So many of us as developers have used things like Java and the .NET SDKs and others to compose applications that have a separate interface from implementation. Even those of us that go back to C remember having to build header files separate from the actual implementations. So what this allows us to do is reason about what the capabilities need to be and capture it in a machine-readable format. This in turn allows us to then mix in these different protocols or styles that we might need to use, whether it's REST or gRPC or GraphQL. So if we're doing something like REST or a REST-like environment, then we can map this operation ID list accounts over to the operation ID over here on Api Spec. So Alps becomes the contract or the interface for our API. Api Spec is the machine-readable structure or definition that allows us to actually understand how to work with it over HTTP, what the servers are, some of the runtime traits, some of the design time traits. If we're using GraphQL, likewise, we can map those things over to our schema structures and our queries so that we could realize the same API using REST and GraphQL if we decide to. Likewise, gRPC, we can do the same thing. We can craft a service IDL, define the data structures, and map that over to Alps. So Alps allows us to capture the core interface of our APIs, and then we may end up releasing that using a number of different protocols, depending on if these are internal applications or external. Or what the preferred style of the developer is. Are they building a front end or is it a back end? Would GraphQL be better for them? Would gRPC be better? Would a REST style be better? We're also seeing this growth of eventing, as I mentioned earlier, and Bill gave us a great introduction to the async API specification. I'm involved with the async API as well, trying to contribute as much as time allows. It's a really exciting approach to be able to document our events. To me, it becomes that glue or that missing link for our API platform. We've done a really good job of documenting our request response. We've got gRPC IDLs that allow us to, because gRPC is bidirectional, allows us to define the inputs and the outputs and deal with streaming and other things. But we haven't had a unified format that allows us to document all of our events. So this is a great opportunity. And things like Avro, used with Apache Kafka, inside of a lot of streaming solutions in enterprises today, could be mapped over from async API into its actual Avro schema, so we can map those things very similar to the way we did with Alps. So now we have all of these different APIs. We have different styles. We have an interface definition with Alps. We have events. How do we roll this up into something that's meaningful for a developer to be able to discover? Enter apis.json. Apis.json's been around for some time. It was originally designed to capture the metadata about our API, the links to documentation, the links to your OpenAPI specification, contact information for the API provider. It was used to power, and still is used to power, a lot of different portals that can be like directories of APIs that are available. I think there's a lot of untapped potential here because a lot of organizations are struggling with how do we make sure that our developers can discover the APIs that we've produced. And apis.json is a great way to kind of pull those things together, find related APIs, reason about the events, the request response styles, and everything else. So I think with a little bit of extensions to this, this might be effectively your primary way of documenting an API and related events and other related APIs that correlate to it or might be used in conjunction with it for driving discovery of APIs within an organization. Just bear in mind, I don't know how many APIs you might have inside your organization. I've worked with orgs that have hundreds. I'm working with orgs that have thousands of APIs, which means tens of thousands of individual endpoints that have to be documented, designed, documented, built, deployed, maintained, supported. It's not easy to find APIs that you want inside an organization that has tens of thousands of endpoints. So we need way better discovery tools to do that, and I think some of these machine-readable formats can help us get that way. Another interesting one that's coming up is Disco. This is very early days. Mike Abinson's been working on this with some other developers, and I think he's working on some content around this as well. It kind of takes us back to the SOAP days and UDDI and some of those other things that probably give us the shivers and make us dive for cover. But it's a very interesting idea of being able to do late binding of services, particularly when you have this combination of internal APIs and external APIs. Not all of your solutions, not all of your capabilities are going to be in-house. You're going to need a way to find and bind to a specific API that maybe even isn't internal inside your own cloud infrastructure, inside your own on-premise infrastructure. So we're going to have to start to find ways of realizing where these different instances are, discover them, and then be able to bind to them. So something to consider as you're looking forward. So this is our evolving enterprise platform. We have our APIs, we have these profiles that define what all the different aspects and all the different styles are supported. We have things like apis.json that pull all that together. We have ALPs that can define the interface side of things, what the capabilities are and what the guarantees are going to be. We then have things like OpenAPI and async API to give us machine-readable views of the protocol specifics and how we're going to really interact with them. We have things like Disco for discovery, and we have all of our different things like Protobuf and Avro and others that are powering things like streaming solutions and others. So our enterprise is starting to evolve. The way we thought about it was just a series of APIs around our enterprise that help us get things done in an automated fashion. And we have this ecosystem of people that are using those APIs, one or more of those aspects. We're now starting to see services layered in here where we're decomposing those APIs into services, and now we have these streams, these data streams that allow us to capture and process this data and analyze it in real time. So our enterprise platforms are changing drastically. The way that we need to view our API platform needs to be beyond just basic REST-based APIs. Then we have things like functions as a service, which I think are going to offer some really interesting ideas here. If our APIs, however they're realized, are about commands and queries, and then we have events and streams that allow us to extend our platform, then function as a service is really that integration glue. It's the thing that's going to be able to react to events and bridge our systems and allow us to quickly develop new and interesting workflows and solutions on top of it. Combine that with things like the serverless aspect of platform as a service, which platform as a service is becoming more and more automated and falls under that serverless bucket. I can just write some integration code and I can deploy that and have it out running 24/7. I can deploy code as a function that only fires off when certain events run. Our world is going to be about integration. When you have hundreds to thousands of APIs with tens of thousands of endpoints, we are going to become integrators once again. We saw this in the 2000s with the SOA world. We're coming back to it again. We can't just be continually building APIs. We're going to have to be integrators. So this leads me to the idea of where we're headed. Let's peek a little bit into what this might look like. In our world, as I said, we're dealing with jobs to be done. People have things that need to get done. And we're moving into this world where applications are no longer the place where we get them done. Rather than users going to the applications are coming to the users. Messaging and collaboration platforms are the first step in that, where we're seeing integrations between different applications occurring inside these messaging platforms. And we're seeing things like streams of events, bidirectional webhooks, and a number of other solutions that are enabling applications to integrate with one another and become better, and to solve those jobs to be done where the user is not sending an email to tell someone to open an app to go get something done. It's a much different way of looking at things, and our APIs and our events, our message streams are driving that. We can have things like hypermedia links that can dynamically inform those applications what actions can be done, and then we can have events that signal when those things were done so that we can take the next steps, kick off the next step in a particular workflow or close out a particular process. This leads me to believe that we cannot scale the way we're working today. We cannot constantly be building APIs and try to get these things out as fast as possible, and also be integrators and also be solution developers and everything else. So I think we need to look back a little bit at the world of client server. Back in the 90s, we used tools like Visual Basic, Power Builder, Delphi, to build rich desktop applications by pointing them at a database, pulling in all the metadata about that database, and then be able to select components to render those and interact with them. It took a lot of the heavy lifting off of our shoulders and allowed us to simply write the event glue code that happens when a user presses an OK button, presses the save button, or whatever else we need it to do. In the SOA days, we had things like BPEL that drove business processes and allows us to stitch together web services and make everything come together so that we could rework our business processes as our business changed. Well, our businesses, our marketplaces are running even faster than when we had these solutions in the 90s and 2000s. So how are we going to deal with this? I think we're seeing this road start to be paved with these kind of low-code, no-code solutions that allow us to stitch together some levels of integration and solutions for the things that are less concerning day to day. We're seeing things like Node-RED allow JavaScript and some tooling to build IoT-level applications and stitch APIs together. We're seeing things like Zapier and IFT automate our lives without us even having to write a line of code. They deal with all the HTTP, they deal with all the webhooks, all the streams, they do all the heavy lifting. We're seeing that emerge as iPaaS within the enterprise now. We're seeing things like Apache Airflow used inside of data analytics to design DAGs that map out all the steps for processing data in an event pipeline, both in parallel and serially. And we're seeing languages like Ballerina emerge as a way to quickly build integrations with a language that was designed to integrate services, APIs, events, and do it efficiently and effectively either in serial or parallel. So I believe we're in those early stages of what was once that low-code, no-code world in the client-server days and those BPEL orchestration layers in the SOA days, where we're starting to see that maybe, just maybe, we don't need to build that login screen yet again. And instead, we can actually focus on getting some things done that we need to get done. So what's that mean? It means that people that are really skilled and passionate about back-end APIs and microservices can focus on that. People passionate about building great front-end applications can do that for those applications that matter that are going to be long-lived. And for the things that we need for a marketing event where it may only need to last for a few weeks or a few months, maybe we have ephemeral applications that are built with these tools to quickly be built, consume APIs, integrate them, give someone a user experience, and then be thrown away. And in those cases, we don't want to spend our precious development cycles building something we're just going to throw away. That's frustrating. I've done that before, and it's not fun. But instead, we use these solutions to accelerate the development of those things that don't matter and allow us to focus on the things that do matter. So kind of an interesting view of where we're headed. So as I wrap up, some things to think about. How do you get started today in your organization with this big viewpoint? How do you get started without being overwhelmed? First, acknowledge that you're going to have to use multiple API styles to solve problems. Quit arguing and start understanding which API styles make the most sense. Discussion, exploration makes sense. Arguing for the sake of argument, wasted time. Keep your platform tidy and machine readable using the specifications that I mentioned earlier. We're going to have to look beyond OpenAPI Spec to cover the things that OpenAPI Spec wasn't designed to cover. It's a great format, so is Blueprint, so are the others that have come before it and continue to thrive in different ways, but we have to really think about how we're going to capture the different aspects of our API platform beyond just those core definitions. Involve data management and governance to make sure that's part of your API practice. If you're responsible for it, start to formalize it, start to get a hold of it. If there's other teams responsible for it, work with them, cooperate with them, don't fight against them. You want to work together. Push to adopt an API-first culture. We build things so much that we forget to encourage people to adopt stuff. If we're going to get to the point where we build solutions on these APIs we're composing, if developer experience really is important, we have to encourage adoption, discoverability. And then start to evaluate some of these tools that are emerging to see what kind of tools might help your organization accelerate the building of certain solutions so that you don't have to code up everything by hand. We spend too much time writing code and too much time in YAML configuration files. We need to get out of that and start to find tools that can help us accelerate further. I'll be around for the rest of the day. If you have any questions, please stop me in the hallway. I'd love to chat with you. Thank you very much.